Understanding has invisible limits. Egypt quietly ignores everyone. Stone carries impossible intentions. Silence preserves impossible intelligence. Every symbol unsettles modern confidence. 10 astonishing discoveries patiently challenge accepted thought, pulling imagination toward a horizon where explanation weakens and disbelief suddenly feels far too comfortable forever. The silence inside the Valley of the Kings feels almost deliberate. Massive limestone cliffs rise from the desert floor, their pale surfaces glowing beneath the Egyptian sun before surrendering to deep shadows as evening approaches. Hidden among these rugged slopes are corridors carved into solid rock, passages leading to worlds that remained untouched for centuries. Every entrance appears ordinary at first glance, a dark opening cut into stone, but each one has the potential to rewrite history. Somewhere within this ancient landscape rests one of Egypt's most fascinating royal figures, Queen Tiye. Unlike many queens whose influence faded behind the achievements of their husbands, Tiye stood at the center of power during the reign of Amenhotep III in the 14th century BC. She was not merely a ceremonial royal wife. Her image appeared beside the king on monuments of unusual scale. Foreign rulers addressed diplomatic letters directly to her, and her advice seems to have carried genuine political weight. For many historians, she represented an extraordinary shift in royal authority, becoming one of the most influential women ancient Egypt ever produced. Yet, for all that is known about her remarkable life, the story surrounding her burial remains surrounded by uncertainty. The trail begins in the Valley of the Kings, where generations of pharaohs prepared elaborate tombs designed to preserve their journey into eternity. These monuments were masterpieces of engineering and symbolism, decorated with sacred texts intended to guide the deceased safely through the afterlife. Every chamber, corridor, and painted wall reflected a belief that death was not an ending, but a transformation. Queen Tiye's original burial place, however, has never been established with complete certainty. Most Egyptologists believe she was first interred in a royal tomb associated with the reign of Amenhotep III. Some evidence suggests she may have rested in the magnificent royal complex at Malkata, before later being transferred elsewhere. Others argue that political upheaval during the reign of her son, Akhenaten, may have led to changes in royal burial practices that affected the entire family. The uncertainty only deepened in the late 19th century. In 1898, French archaeologist Victor Loret uncovered a remarkable tomb now known as KV35. Originally built for Amenhotep II, the tomb contained far more than its original occupant. Hidden within its side chambers were numerous royal mummies that priests had secretly relocated centuries after their deaths. Their purpose appears practical rather than ceremonial. During periods of widespread tomb robbery, priests gathered vulnerable royal remains into hidden caches, hoping to protect them from looters. Among those carefully concealed bodies was an elderly woman resting quietly inside a plain coffin. For decades, her identity remained uncertain. Researchers examined the mummy's delicate facial features, her carefully preserved ears, and the distinctive shape of her skull. Most striking of all was her remarkably preserved hair. Thick, wavy strands still framed her face after more than 3,000 years, creating an unusually personal connection across the centuries. It was not simply another royal mummy, it felt like the presence of an individual whose story had somehow survived. Modern DNA analysis eventually strengthened the case that this woman was Queen Tiye. Comparisons with other royal mummies, including the mummy believed to be Tutankhamun, suggested close familial relationships that aligned remarkably well with known royal genealogy. Today, many scholars consider the identification highly convincing. Yet, even with advances in genetics, important questions remain unanswered. If this truly is Queen Tiye, why was she moved? Where exactly had she been buried originally? What circumstances forced priests to relocate one of Egypt's most respected queens into another king's tomb? Conventional explanations point toward practical necessity. By the late New Kingdom, organized tomb robbery had become an enormous problem. Valuable funerary treasures attracted thieves willing to violate even the holiest royal burials. Ancient records themselves describe investigations into stolen tombs and officials attempting to recover looted treasures. Relocating royal mummies into secret caches may simply have been the most effective way to preserve what remained. But not everyone believes practicality explains every detail. Some independent researchers have noticed that Queen Tiye appears repeatedly at important turning points in the royal family's history. She lived through the final years of Amenhotep III, witnessed the religious revolution initiated by Akhenaten, and maintained influence during one of ancient Egypt's most turbulent political transformations. Could her burial have reflected more than security concerns? Some have suggested that her original tomb may still lie undiscovered beneath unexplored sections of the Theban necropolis. Modern technologies, including ground-penetrating radar and high-resolution geological surveys, continue to reveal hidden voids beneath the desert floor. Several previously unknown chambers have already been identified elsewhere in Egypt using methods unavailable to earlier generations of explorers. If entire tombs can remain concealed for thousands of years, could Queen Tiye's first resting place still exist somewhere beyond the reach of current excavation? Others focus less on physical locations and more on symbolism. Tiye occupied a unique position between traditional royal religion and the dramatic theological changes introduced by Akhenaten. Some researchers have wondered whether later rulers intentionally altered memories of that period, relocating members of the royal family as political priorities shifted. Although no definitive evidence confirms such deliberate actions, the fragmented historical record leaves room for multiple interpretations. Then there is the remarkable preservation of her mummy itself. Visitors often comment on how lifelike her features appear, compared with many other royal remains. Her abundant hair, graceful profile, and peaceful expression have inspired both scientific admiration and popular fascination. Specialists explain these characteristics through careful embalming techniques and favorable environmental conditions within the tomb caches. Even so, standing before her remains can produce an unsettling feeling that written descriptions rarely capture. It is as though history has paused instead of ended. Every artifact associated with Queen Tiye seems to hint at a larger story. Scarabs bearing her name have been discovered across vast regions. Diplomatic correspondence reveals foreign kings seeking her favor. Monumental statues portray her with unusual prominence beside Amenhotep III. Yet the place intended to preserve her eternal rest has become one of the greatest uncertainties surrounding her life. Perhaps that uncertainty is precisely what continues to draw scholars back to the Valley of the Kings. Every newly examined inscription, every refined DNA analysis, every geological survey adds another fragment to an incomplete picture. The evidence grows clearer in some places, while becoming more mysterious in others. Queen Tiye herself has emerged from history with surprising clarity. Her voice echoes through diplomacy, architecture, and royal tradition. Yet the path she followed into eternity remains only partially illuminated. Somewhere beneath the limestone cliffs, beneath layers of sand and centuries of unanswered questions, there may still be a forgotten chamber waiting to reveal another piece of her remarkable story. Or perhaps the greatest secret surrounding Queen Tiye is not where she was finally found, but where she was first meant to rest. If Queen Ta reminds us how even a royal burial can leave centuries of unanswered questions, the next mystery carries us much farther back, into a time when Egypt itself was still taking shape. Here, names blur into symbols, history overlaps with legend, and a single carved object has become one of the most debated relics from the dawn of civilization. Inside the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford rests an object no larger than a serving tray, yet its influence reaches across more than 5,000 years. Fashioned from pale limestone, its surface is crowded with carefully carved figures, standards carried high, ritual scenes unfolding in orderly procession, and, dominating the composition, a ruler wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. At first glance, it appears to be a ceremonial artifact, perhaps created to commemorate a royal achievement. But the longer one studies its details, the more elusive its meaning becomes. This is the King Scorpion mace head. Discovered in the late 19th century at Hierakonpolis, one of the most important religious and political centers of pre-dynastic Egypt, the mace head emerged from what archaeologists believe was a sacred temple deposit. The site itself has yielded some of the earliest royal monuments ever found, including the famous Narmer Palette. Long before the pyramids, before the Valley of the Kings, and before Egypt became the unified kingdom familiar to history, Hierakonpolis stood at the center of a rapidly changing world. Its temples were places where religion, authority, and emerging kingship became inseparable. The mace head immediately attracted attention because it appeared to preserve a glimpse into this formative period. At its center stands a ruler identified by many scholars as King Scorpion, distinguished by a small scorpion symbol positioned beside his royal emblem. He is shown holding a ceremonial hoe, seemingly participating in an important ritual. Around him, attendants carry fans, banners, baskets, and standards adorned with sacred symbols. Rows of workers appear engaged in organized activity, while captured birds hang from poles nearby. Every figure appears deliberate. Every symbol seems carefully chosen. Yet the story they tell remains uncertain. The most widely accepted interpretation suggests the mace head commemorates an irrigation ceremony, or the ceremonial opening of canals. In ancient Egypt, controlling the Nile's waters meant controlling prosperity itself. Directing floodwaters into cultivated fields transformed barren ground into fertile farmland, making irrigation one of the foundations of royal responsibility. The king's symbolic use of a hoe may therefore represent his role as guarantor of order, abundance, and divine harmony. This explanation aligns comfortably with what is known about early Egyptian kingship, but it does not explain everything. Several scenes resist straightforward interpretation. Tiny standards bear unfamiliar emblems whose meanings have long been forgotten. Birds suspended from poles may symbolize conquered territories, or perhaps something entirely different. Rows of baskets, plants, and ritual objects seem arranged according to rules no surviving text fully explains. Unlike later Egyptian monuments, this artifact comes from a period before hieroglyphic writing had fully matured. There are symbols, there are names, there are clues, but there is no accompanying narrative to guide modern readers through the scene. The result is a monument that seems to speak in a language only partially understood. Even the identity of King Scorpion remains uncertain. Some Egyptologists believe he ruled shortly before Narmer, the king traditionally credited with unifying Upper and Lower Egypt. Others suggest Scorpion may refer to more than one ruler, perhaps belonging to an entire lineage whose histories later merged into legend. Fragmentary inscriptions from this era provide only scattered pieces of evidence, leaving considerable room for debate about chronology and succession. Was King Scorpion a historical monarch whose accomplishments were overshadowed by later kings? Or has the surviving evidence combined several rulers into a single symbolic figure? The uncertainty extends beyond his identity. The ceremonial mace itself raises additional questions. Although modeled after a weapon, elaborate mace heads such as this one were almost certainly never intended for battle. Instead, they appear to have functioned as ceremonial objects expressing royal authority and divine legitimacy. Their carvings transformed practical weapons into sacred political statements. Yet, why create such an intricate monument if only a small circle of priests or officials would ever see it? Some researchers suggest these objects served as ritual offerings within temple complexes rather than public monuments. Their purpose may have been directed toward the gods instead of ordinary observers. If so, many details carved into the stone could represent sacred concepts whose meanings were never intended to be widely understood. Others propose a different possibility. Because the earliest Egyptian state emerged gradually rather than suddenly, the mace head may preserve visual traditions inherited from cultures that predated unified Egypt itself. Certain symbols appearing on the artifact resemble motifs found elsewhere in pre-dynastic archaeology, yet their significance remains debated. Rather than illustrating a single historical event, the composition could blend ceremony, mythology, political messaging, and religious symbolism into one carefully constructed image. In that case, searching for a literal interpretation might overlook its true purpose entirely. Beyond mainstream scholarship, more speculative ideas occasionally surface. Some independent researchers argue that the monument encodes forgotten historical knowledge using symbolic language that has yet to be deciphered. Others wonder whether the arrangement of standards, animals, and ritual objects follows mathematical or astronomical principles no one has recognized. A few have suggested that later Egyptian civilization inherited traditions far older than conventional chronologies acknowledge, and that artifacts like the king scorpion mace head preserve fragments of those vanished cultural memories. None of these proposals has gained broad acceptance among specialists. Yet they continue to appear because the monument itself refuses simple explanation. Unlike inscriptions from later dynasties, there is no lengthy text confirming exactly what viewers are meant to understand. Every interpretation depends upon comparisons, patterns, and educated reconstruction. As new discoveries reshape our understanding of pre-dynastic Egypt, earlier conclusions are sometimes revised, reminding us that even the strongest historical models remain open to refinement. Modern imaging technologies have revealed carving techniques and surface details invisible to earlier generations of researchers. Microscopic analysis continues to improve understanding of how the limestone was worked and preserved. Comparative studies with newly excavated artifacts occasionally illuminate previously overlooked connections. Each advance answers one question while quietly introducing another. Perhaps that is the enduring power of the king scorpion mace head. It belongs to an age standing just beyond the reach of written history, where rulers first transformed symbols into kingship and ritual into government. It survives not as a complete story, but as a fragment suspended between archaeology and memory. Every carved figure appears intentional, yet none speaks loudly enough to silence competing interpretations. 5,000 years later, the ruler holding his ceremonial hoe still stands frozen in stone, surrounded by symbols whose full meaning may have vanished with the civilization that created them. Whether the mace head records a royal ceremony, a political triumph, a sacred ritual, or something more layered than any single explanation allows, it continues to invite the same quiet question. What message did its creators believe would endure forever? And what part of that message are we still unable to see? If the king scorpion mace head leaves us searching for meaning within symbols carved at the dawn of Egyptian civilization, our journey now moves thousands of years forward to a monument where symbols no longer whisper. They cover entire walls and ceilings. Here, the mystery is not hidden within a single artifact, but stretched across corridors of painted stone, where astronomy, religion, and philosophy merge into one of the most remarkable royal tombs ever created. The entrance to K59 cuts quietly into the limestone cliffs of the Valley of the Kings. From the outside, it appears almost unassuming, another dark opening carved into an endless landscape of pale rock and drifting desert light. Yet, with every step downward, the atmosphere begins to change. The temperature cools, the daylight fades. Painted corridors emerge from the darkness, their walls still carrying astonishing colors despite the passage of more than 3,000 years. Deep within these chambers lies the tomb of Ramesses VI. Although originally begun for his predecessor, Ramesses V, the monument was later expanded and completed during the reign of Ramesses VI in the 12th century BC. Like many royal tombs of Egypt's 20th dynasty, K59 was designed not simply as a burial place, but as a carefully constructed map of eternity. Every corridor represented another stage of the king's journey beyond death. Every inscription served as both instruction and protection, guiding the ruler safely through the unseen world. Yet, among all its extraordinary decorations, one feature has captured attention for centuries. Above the burial chamber stretches a ceiling unlike almost any other in ancient Egypt. At first glance, it resembles a magnificent work of art. Rich blue backgrounds frame elegant figures. Celestial boats glide through invisible waters. Stars are arranged in deliberate patterns, and the sky goddess Nut stretches across the heavens, her body arching protectively over the entire chamber. But the longer one studies these paintings, the more they begin to resemble something beyond simple decoration. They appear organized, measured, purposeful. Modern scholars identify much of this ceiling as an illustrated version of the Book of the Day and the Book of the Night, sacred cosmological texts describing the daily journey of the sun through both the visible sky and the hidden underworld. According to ancient Egyptian belief, the sun did not merely set each evening. Instead, it entered the realm beneath the earth, traveling through 12 mysterious hours before being reborn at dawn. The ceiling transforms this invisible voyage into a visual narrative. Nut, the goddess of the sky, swallows the setting sun each evening and gives birth to it again every morning. Solar boats carry divine beings across celestial waters. Constellations accompany sacred figures whose names survive in hieroglyphic inscriptions. Every image reinforces the Egyptian conviction that the universe operated according to eternal cycles rather than linear time. Death itself became part of that rhythm. To Egyptologists, the astronomical ceiling reflects a sophisticated religious cosmology rather than a scientific star chart in the modern sense. The stars depicted often serve symbolic purposes connected to divine order, sacred timekeeping, and ritual renewal. Certain constellations can be identified with reasonable confidence, while others remain uncertain, their original meanings obscured by the immense passage of time. Even so, the ceiling continues to inspire debate. Some of its celestial arrangements do not fit neatly into modern astronomical expectations. Certain figures combine symbolic imagery with observations of the night sky in ways that resist simple classification. Egyptian artists were not attempting to produce objective maps, as contemporary astronomers might. Instead, they merged observation, theology, mythology, and royal ideology into a single visual language. The result is breathtaking. But it is not always easy to interpret. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, scholars devoted enormous effort to understanding these painted heavens. By comparing inscriptions across multiple royal tombs, they gradually reconstructed portions of Egypt's celestial tradition. They identified recurring constellations, divine processions, and ritual sequences that connected the heavens with the king's eternal transformation. Yet, gaps remain. Many individual stars cannot be matched with complete certainty. Several celestial figures appear nowhere else in surviving Egyptian art. Some astronomical sequences differ subtly from tomb to tomb, suggesting either evolving traditions or symbolic variations whose significance has been lost. Could those differences simply reflect artistic choice? Or do they preserve knowledge modern readers no longer recognize? More speculative interpretations often begin here. Some independent researchers argue that the astronomical ceilings contain precise observational records encoded within symbolic imagery. They point to recurring star groupings, carefully measured proportions, and repeated celestial arrangements as possible evidence that ancient Egyptian skywatchers possessed a deeper understanding of astronomy than is generally acknowledged. Others suggest the ceilings function as multidimensional calendars, combining solar, lunar, and stellar cycles within a single symbolic composition. According to this view, the paintings may have served both ritual and practical purposes, allowing priests to track sacred festivals or celestial events through visual patterns rather than written calculations alone. These ideas remain subjects of ongoing discussion rather than established historical conclusions. Even more unconventional theories occasionally emerge. Some propose that the ceiling preserves memories of exceptionally ancient astronomical observations handed down through generations long before the construction of K59. Others wonder whether certain symbolic arrangements reflect events no longer visible in today's skies due to the slow movement of Earth's axis, known as precession. Astronomers acknowledge that the positions of stars gradually change over thousands of years. Whether the paintings intentionally preserve such long-term observations remains uncertain. No definitive evidence has confirmed these interpretations. Still, the questions continue to attract curiosity because the ceiling itself possesses an extraordinary level of complexity. Every section appears interconnected. Every figure occupies a carefully chosen position. Nothing seems accidental. Standing beneath the painted ceiling today produces an experience difficult to describe. Visitors often find themselves instinctively looking upward, just as the ancient artists intended. The chamber feels less like a tomb than a carefully enclosed universe, its ceiling dissolving into an endless celestial landscape where mythology and astronomy become almost impossible to separate. The silence only deepens the impression. Far above, sunlight still crosses the Valley of the Kings as it has for millennia. Deep below, painted stars remain fixed upon limestone, untouched by sunrise or sunset. The contrast is striking. One sky moves constantly. The other has remained perfectly still for over 3,000 years. Modern technology continues to reveal new details hidden within these ancient paintings. High-resolution photography, multispectral imaging, and digital reconstruction have exposed faded pigments invisible to the human eye, allowing scholars to recover damaged inscriptions and refine earlier translations. Every improvement sharpens the picture while simultaneously reminding researchers how much has already been lost. Tiny fragments of paint, half-erased hieroglyphs, faint outlines that once carried complete ideas. Each discovery suggests the ceiling was even richer than what survives today. Perhaps that is why KV9 continues to fascinate historians, astronomers, artists, and curious travelers alike. It occupies a remarkable place where observable nature meets spiritual imagination, where careful celestial observation merges seamlessly with sacred symbolism. Rather than separating science from religion, its creators wove them together into a single vision of the universe, one in which every star, every god, and every royal soul participated in the same eternal cycle. Whether the astronomical ceiling represents primarily theology, sophisticated celestial observation, symbolic philosophy, or some combination still beyond complete understanding, remains an open question. Thousands of years after its completion, the painted heavens of Ramesses VI continue to watch silently over the chamber below, inviting each new generation to search the stars once more and ask whether the greatest mystery lies not in what the ancient Egyptians painted, but in what they believed those heavens were trying to tell them. If the painted heavens of the tomb of Ramesses VI invite us to look upward in search of forgotten knowledge, the next mystery asks us to look in the opposite direction, downward, into the earth itself. Hidden beneath a monument that now appears broken and incomplete lies a labyrinth of passages that has puzzled historians for generations. Sometimes, the greatest mysteries are not found in monuments that survived perfectly, but in those that seem to have failed. On the edge of Egypt's Fayum region, where fertile land gradually surrenders to the open desert, a dark silhouette rises from the sands. Unlike the smooth, geometric perfection of Giza's famous pyramids, this structure appears worn, fractured, and almost defeated by time. Its outer limestone casing has long since disappeared, exposing the dark, mud-brick core beneath. From a distance, the monument seems less like a royal tomb and more like the weathered remains of a forgotten hill. This is the Black Pyramid of Amenemhat III. Its modern name comes not from any ancient inscription, but from the color of its exposed core. As sunlight strikes the weathered mud brick, the pyramid takes on a deep, gray-black appearance, creating a striking contrast against the surrounding desert. It is a monument that seems to carry its own shadow. Built during the reign of Amenemhat III in the 12th dynasty, around the 19th century BC, the pyramid belongs to one of Egypt's most prosperous periods. The Middle Kingdom was an age of remarkable engineering, expanding trade, ambitious construction projects, and increasingly sophisticated royal administration. Amenemhat III himself is remembered as one of the dynasty's most capable rulers, overseeing irrigation works, mining expeditions, and monumental architecture across Egypt. For a king associated with such achievements, expectations for his royal pyramid would have been enormous. And yet, among all Egypt's pyramids, this one remains one of the most unusual. Unlike the great stone pyramids of the Old Kingdom, the Black Pyramid relied primarily upon mud brick for its core. Stone was still used for internal chambers, foundations, and protective elements, but the bulk of the structure consisted of millions of carefully molded bricks. To modern observers, this may seem like an unexpected choice. Why would a powerful pharaoh abandon the durable limestone construction that had already demonstrated its longevity centuries earlier? The answer may lie partly in practicality. Mud brick could be produced quickly, transported efficiently, and assembled using techniques refined over countless generations. The outer casing of polished white limestone would have concealed the brick core completely, creating an appearance every bit as magnificent as earlier pyramids. At least, that was the intention. Not long after construction began, problems emerged. The ground beneath the monument proved less stable than expected. The pyramid stood near the edge of cultivated land, where higher groundwater and softer soil presented engineering challenges unknown to builders working upon the solid bedrock plateau at Giza. As the enormous weight of the pyramid increased, sections of the internal structure began to shift. Cracks appeared, walls leaned, passages deformed under immense pressure. Ancient builders attempted to correct these problems as construction continued. Reinforcing walls were added. Corridors were strengthened. Massive cedar beams were inserted to stabilize weakened ceilings. Ingenious architectural modifications reveal engineers actively responding to structural stress while the monument was still being completed. The pyramid itself became a record of adaptation. To many Egyptologists, these repairs demonstrate remarkable technical skill rather than failure. Instead of abandoning the project immediately, builders applied increasingly sophisticated solutions in an effort to preserve the king's tomb. Yet eventually, reality prevailed. Most scholars believe Amenemhat III chose not to be buried there. Instead, he appears to have commissioned another pyramid at Hawara, located farther south, where he was ultimately interred. The Black Pyramid, despite years of labor and extraordinary engineering effort, was left behind. Or perhaps not entirely. Excavations revealed that the monument was far from empty. Within its complex interior lay one of the most intricate underground layouts of any Egyptian pyramid. Corridors twist through multiple levels. Hidden chambers branch unexpectedly from central passages. Burial apartments were prepared not only for the king, but also for royal women, suggesting the complex served a broader dynastic purpose than many earlier pyramids. Unlike simpler pyramid interiors of previous centuries, this underground world feels almost maze-like. Every turn introduces another chamber. Every corridor suggests careful planning. Navigation itself seems intentional. The deeper researchers explored, the more unusual details they encountered. Massive quartzite blocks protected important chambers. Elaborate portcullis systems were designed to seal passages permanently after burial. Hidden architectural features complicated movement through the interior, creating an environment that balanced sacred symbolism with practical security. Some passages seem almost unnecessarily complex. Why? Conventional explanations point toward protection against tomb robbers. By the Middle Kingdom, royal builders understood that obvious passageways offered little defense against determined thieves. Increasingly elaborate internal layouts represented an attempt to delay or discourage intrusion. Yet even this explanation may not account for every design choice. Certain corridors appear to lead nowhere. Some chambers seem oversized compared to their apparent function. Others contain architectural arrangements unlike those found elsewhere. Could every feature simply represent evolving engineering methods? Or were additional symbolic purposes embedded within the design? One of the most intriguing discoveries involved the pyramidion, the polished capstone that once crowned the monument. Unlike the ruined mud brick core, this beautifully carved stone survives remarkably well. Its surfaces bear finely executed religious inscriptions connecting the king with solar theology and eternal rebirth. The symbolism is unmistakable. The pyramid itself represented more than a tomb. It was a machine of transformation. Every architectural element reflected the ancient Egyptian belief that the king would ascend spiritually, joining the eternal cycle of creation represented by the sun. Even if structural problems affected the physical monument, its symbolic purpose remained profoundly important. And yet, despite this carefully designed spiritual landscape, the Black Pyramid has often inspired interpretations extending beyond conventional archaeology. Some independent researchers point to its unusual internal complexity as evidence that portions of the structure served purposes beyond burial. The multiple chambers, intersecting corridors, and reinforced spaces have prompted suggestions that the monument functioned as a ceremonial center for rituals now lost to history. Others focus upon its apparent engineering difficulties. Could the cracks and deformations reflect more than unstable soil? A handful of speculative writers have proposed that ancient builders encountered geological conditions they did not fully understand. Subsurface movement, hidden cavities, or natural forces that complicated construction in unexpected ways. Modern geological studies generally support far more conventional explanations involving unstable foundations and groundwater. Even so, the questions persist because the pyramid's history remains unusually complicated. There are also theories centered upon symbolism rather than engineering. Some researchers note that the Black Pyramid occupies a transitional moment in Egyptian history, standing between the monumental certainty of earlier pyramid builders and the increasingly concealed royal tombs that would later appear in the Valley of the Kings. In that sense, the monument seems to belong to two architectural traditions at once. It reaches backward toward the age of pyramids. It quietly anticipates the hidden tombs of later centuries. Was this merely coincidence? Or does the pyramid reflect changing royal beliefs about death, security, and eternity? Another point of fascination concerns the immense effort invested in a structure ultimately abandoned as a royal burial place. Ancient Egyptian construction projects demanded extraordinary resources: labor, planning, transportation, and organization on a national scale. Why continue reinforcing a monument already showing signs of structural failure? Was the project sustained because of political necessity, religious obligation, royal determination? Or did abandoning the pyramid carry symbolic consequences too significant to accept easily? These questions remain difficult to answer because written records concerning the monument are remarkably limited. Unlike later historical periods rich in surviving inscriptions, much of what scholars know comes directly from archaeological investigation rather than contemporary explanation. The stones themselves have become the primary witnesses. Modern technology continues to reshape understanding of the pyramid. Laser scanning has documented subtle shifts within surviving chambers. Structural analysis helps reconstruct how enormous loads affected the mud brick core over time. Ground-penetrating surveys have improved understanding of surrounding features without disturbing fragile remains. Each new investigation reveals additional details. None resolves every mystery. Walking through the surviving passages today is unlike exploring many other Egyptian monuments. The atmosphere feels unusually intimate. Massive stone blocks press inward from every direction. Ceilings bear visible evidence of ancient repairs. Cracks, frozen in place for thousands of years, remind visitors that the monument struggled against gravity almost from the moment it was built. The engineering becomes deeply human. Instead of witnessing effortless perfection, we encounter problem-solving, adaptation, persistence, ancient builders responding to challenges in real time. There is something profoundly compelling about that image. The Black Pyramid reminds us that even civilizations renowned for extraordinary precision faced uncertainty. Their monuments were not created by magic, but through countless decisions made by architects, engineers, craftsmen, laborers, and priests working together toward a vision larger than themselves. Perhaps that is why the pyramid continues to inspire both admiration and speculation. Its visible imperfections invite questions that flawless monuments rarely provoke. Its abandoned corridors suggest stories left unfinished. Its hidden chambers hint at intentions only partially preserved. Whether viewed as an ambitious engineering experiment, a sacred royal monument altered by unforeseen circumstances, or a structure whose deepest symbolism has yet to be fully understood, the Black Pyramid occupies a unique place in Egypt's archaeological landscape. It stands not as a monument to failure, but as a reminder that history is often written in unfinished forms. Beneath its weathered mud brick core, beyond the reinforced corridors and silent burial chambers, there remains the unmistakable sense that the monument still guards secrets no excavation has completely uncovered. And perhaps somewhere within those dark passageways, beneath layers of stone, sand, and forgotten intention, another chapter of Amenemhat III's remarkable story is still waiting to emerge. And as we leave behind the last enigma, another doorway opens. One carved not only into stone, but into one of history's most enduring identity puzzles. Deep beneath the sun-scorched cliffs of Egypt's Valley of the Kings lies a burial chamber so unusual, so strangely assembled, that more than a century after its discovery, scholars continue to ask a remarkably simple question: who was truly laid to rest there? The chamber is known simply as KV55. At first glance, it seems almost unremarkable. Hidden within the barren limestone landscape on the west bank of the Nile near Luxor, the entrance blends almost seamlessly into the valley's pale rock. Around it stand the resting places of some of ancient Egypt's greatest rulers, pharaohs whose names have echoed across thousands of years. Yet, K555 possesses a different kind of reputation. It is not celebrated because of lavish treasures or magnificent wall paintings. Instead, it has become famous because almost everything inside appears to contradict expectations. The tomb itself is surprisingly modest. A descending corridor leads into a series of chambers that feel incomplete, almost improvised. Unlike the richly decorated royal tombs nearby, its walls are largely bare. There are no elaborate scenes guiding the deceased through the afterlife. No carefully painted hymns to the gods stretch across the stone. Instead, visitors encounter an unsettling simplicity, as though the burial had been assembled in haste, or perhaps altered after it was finished. When British archaeologist Edward Ayrton uncovered K555 in 1907, working under Theodore M. Davis, the discovery initially seemed promising. The sealed entrance suggested that important contents might still remain inside. As excavators entered the chambers, they indeed found royal objects scattered throughout the tomb. But rather than telling one coherent story, each artifact seemed to point toward a different one. Pieces of gilded furniture lay disassembled across the floor. Elegant ceremonial objects bore the names of multiple members of Egypt's royal family. A magnificent shrine, once covered in gold leaf, had clearly been intended for a queen. Yet the face carved upon it had been deliberately destroyed. Fragments of coffins appeared to have been altered. Even the inscriptions had been erased in places, as though someone had intentionally rewritten history. It was immediately clear that KV55 was no ordinary burial. The mystery deepened when archaeologists uncovered a damaged wooden coffin resting within the chamber. The coffin itself had suffered extraordinary treatment. Its gold had been stripped away. The royal uraeus, the cobra symbol worn upon the forehead of kings, had been removed. Most strikingly, the face had been violently smashed apart. Damage of this kind was rarely accidental. Throughout Egyptian history, destroying a person's image carried profound symbolic meaning. Ancient Egyptians believed that names and likenesses were essential parts of one's eternal existence. Erasing them was more than vandalism. It represented an attempt to deny someone immortality itself. Whoever had occupied this coffin had not merely been buried. Someone had seemingly tried to erase them from memory. Inside lay a single human skeleton. Almost immediately, debate erupted over its identity. For more than a century, researchers have argued over one of Egyptology's most fascinating questions. Was this the body of Pharaoh Akhenaten, or someone else entirely? To understand why this matters, the story must step back into one of the most extraordinary periods in ancient Egyptian history. Around 1353 BC, Pharaoh Akhenaten initiated changes unlike anything Egypt had experienced before. For generations, Egyptians had worshipped a vast pantheon of gods, led by powerful priesthoods centered at magnificent temples. Akhenaten challenged this ancient tradition by elevating the Aten, the radiant disk of the sun, to supreme importance. He established an entirely new royal capital at Amarna, far from traditional religious centers. Art transformed dramatically. Royal portraits abandoned idealized perfection in favor of elongated heads, narrow faces, rounded stomachs, and intimate family scenes unlike previous Egyptian imagery. The king appeared, holding his daughters beneath rays of sunlight ending in tiny hands. Religion politics, and artistic convention all shifted simultaneously. Whether this represented true monotheism, a unique form of sun worship, or a more complex theological reform remains debated today. What is certain is that Akhenaten's reign disrupted centuries of deeply rooted tradition. After his death, something equally remarkable occurred. His city was abandoned, his monuments dismantled, his name omitted from later king lists. Future rulers worked systematically to restore Egypt's older religious order. To many later Egyptians, Akhenaten became a ruler whose memory deserved disappearance. This historical campaign of erasure provides one possible explanation for KV 55. Could the damaged coffin represent the final act of revenge against the so-called heretic king? At first, many archaeologists believed exactly that. Several objects discovered inside the tomb bore direct connections to Akhenaten's family. Among them were magical bricks inscribed with his royal names, ritual objects placed within royal burials to provide supernatural protection. Other inscriptions referred to members of the Amarna royal household. Everything seemed to point toward Akhenaten himself. Then, the skeleton complicated everything. Early anatomical examinations suggested the body belonged to a remarkably young individual. Some estimates proposed an age between 18 and 26 years old. Yet, Akhenaten appears to have ruled Egypt for approximately 17 years and fathered several children, including Tutankhamun, according to one widely accepted interpretation. Could someone so young truly have accomplished all of that? If the skeletal age estimates were correct, Akhenaten suddenly became a difficult fit. Alternative candidates emerged. One of the most compelling was Smenkhkare. Smenkhkare remains one of ancient Egypt's most mysterious rulers. Historical records mentioning him are astonishingly scarce. Some scholars believe he briefly ruled alongside Akhenaten. Others think he succeeded him for only a short period before disappearing from history almost entirely. His relationship to Akhenaten remains uncertain. Was he a younger brother, a son, a co-ruler? Even his exact reign is still debated. If KV 55 contained Smenkhkare rather than Akhenaten, many puzzles suddenly seemed easier to explain. A young skeleton would fit more comfortably. The damaged burial could reflect political upheaval following Amarna's collapse. Yet, this solution introduced new problems. Why would objects so strongly connected to Akhenaten accompany another king? Why relocate Smenkkare's burial to the Valley of the Kings at all? The evidence resisted every straightforward interpretation. Then modern science entered the investigation. Advances in CT scanning allowed researchers to re-examine the skeleton in unprecedented detail. Instead of relying solely upon traditional visual assessments, specialists analyzed internal bone structure, dental development, and subtle age-related features invisible to earlier investigators. Some researchers concluded that previous estimates had significantly underestimated the individual's age. Rather than a man in his early 20s, they argued the skeleton may belong to someone closer to 35 or even 40 years old. If correct, Akhenaten returned as a plausible candidate once again. DNA analysis added another fascinating layer. Studies comparing royal mummies suggested that the individual from KV 55 was the father of Tutankhamun. This finding dramatically strengthened the argument for Akhenaten, who many Egyptologists already believed occupied that role. At the same time, DNA cannot directly identify a historical name. It establishes biological relationships. It cannot answer how a person was remembered politically, what titles they held at different moments, or whether another closely related royal might fit equally well. Even genetic evidence leaves room for debate. Adding to the mystery is the tomb itself. Many researchers no longer believe KV-55 was originally intended as the occupant's permanent resting place. Instead, they suspect it functioned as a secondary burial. Perhaps during the political chaos following Amarna's abandonment, royal mummies and sacred objects required relocation. Officials may have gathered whatever remained available and transported them hurriedly into the Valley of the Kings. If so, the strange mixture of artifacts begins making more sense. Objects belonging to multiple individuals could have traveled together. A queen's shrine might accompany a king's remains. Altered inscriptions might reflect changing political priorities rather than simple carelessness. The tomb starts resembling a temporary refuge rather than a carefully planned royal monument. But that explanation raises another question. Who ordered the transfer? Was it an act of respect designed to preserve endangered royal burials? Or was it an attempt to conceal uncomfortable memories while quietly returning the deceased to traditional royal ground? Ancient Egyptian officials rarely left detailed explanations for such decisions. Silence became part of the archaeological record. Some researchers have looked beyond politics toward symbolism. The mutilated coffin remains especially difficult to ignore. Removing the royal cobra, smashing the face, and stripping precious materials required deliberate effort. If Akhenaten truly lay inside, these actions align remarkably well with later attempts to erase his legacy. His religious reforms challenged powerful institutions. Future rulers openly restored older traditions. Damaging his burial could represent the final expression of official condemnation. Yet another possibility exists. Perhaps the coffin originally belonged to someone else. Evidence suggests portions of it may have been reused. Ancient Egyptians occasionally recycled expensive funerary equipment, particularly during periods of political instability. The smashed face could therefore reflect modifications made before the final burial, rather than hatred directed toward its last occupant. In archaeology, context often proves as important as the object itself. Unfortunately, KV-55 offers only fragments of that context. Nothing fits together perfectly. Naturally, mysteries of this magnitude have inspired more speculative interpretations as well. Some independent researchers suggest KV-55 hints at an intentional rewriting of Egyptian history on a far larger scale than traditionally accepted. They propose that identities within the Amarna family were deliberately merged, divided, or reassigned to obscure controversial events. According to these ideas, Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, and even other royal figures may have occupied more fluid political roles than surviving records suggest. Others focus on the extraordinary artistic changes of the Amarna period. The elongated skulls depicted in royal statues have inspired suggestions ranging from symbolic religious expression to unusual hereditary traits. More imaginative theories have ventured much further, proposing that these artistic depictions preserve memories of encounters with beings unlike ordinary humans. Mainstream Egyptologists overwhelmingly interpret the distinctive style as an intentional artistic convention rather than a literal representation of anatomy. Actual examinations of royal mummies have not demonstrated the dramatically elongated skulls portrayed in many Amarna sculptures. Nevertheless, the unusual imagery continues to invite speculation, illustrating how powerful visual symbols can shape interpretations long after the civilization that created them has disappeared. There are also questions surrounding the apparent haste of the burial itself. Why does the tomb feel unfinished? Why are valuable objects mixed together without the careful organization expected in royal interments? Could political instability alone explain such irregularities? Or do these scattered remains reflect a larger story whose written chapters have simply not survived? Every generation of archaeologists returns to KV-55 armed with better technology than the last. Microscopic analysis, high-resolution medical imaging, genetic sequencing, digital reconstruction. Each advancement answers certain questions while revealing entirely new ones. Instead of closing the investigation, science has often expanded it. Perhaps that is what makes KV-55 so captivating. This is not merely a mystery about a single skeleton. It is a mystery about memory itself. How does an entire civilization attempt to erase one of its own kings? Can history ever be completely rewritten? Or do fragments, broken coffins, scattered names, damaged shrines, and silent chambers always remain, waiting for future generations to assemble them once again? Somewhere beneath the limestone cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, in a tomb that still refuses to tell one consistent story, those questions linger in the stillness. And perhaps the greatest mystery is not whether the occupant was Akhenaten, Smenkhkare, or another forgotten royal altogether, but whether the truth was hidden intentionally, leaving behind a puzzle that ancient Egypt never meant anyone to solve. As the unanswered questions surrounding the mysterious occupant of KV-55 slowly fade into the silence of the Valley of the Kings, another object from the same ancient landscape quietly draws our attention. Unlike a forgotten skeleton or a damaged coffin, this mystery is small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. Yet its story reaches far beyond Egypt, beyond the earth itself, and perhaps into humanity's earliest understanding of the heavens. Hidden among the treasures of one of history's most famous royal burials rests a weapon unlike any other. Not because of its craftsmanship, not because of its decoration, but because its metal was never born on Earth. When Howard Carter first entered the tomb of Tutankhamun in November 1922, he found himself standing before one of archaeology's greatest discoveries. For more than 3,000 years, the chambers had remained largely undisturbed beneath the golden cliffs of the Valley of the Kings. Every room overflowed with extraordinary objects: chariots, furniture, jewelry, ceremonial statues, elaborate shrines, and countless possessions prepared for a young king's eternal journey into the afterlife. Among more than 5,000 artifacts, one item seemed almost modest. Placed carefully within the wrappings of Tutankhamun's mummy was an elegant dagger. At first glance, it appeared to be exactly what one might expect from an Egyptian royal burial. Its handle was fashioned from gold and decorated with delicate geometric patterns. The pommel was carved from polished crystal. Its sheath displayed intricate floral motifs, and feather-like designs worked into precious metals with remarkable precision. Everything about the dagger reflected royal craftsmanship. Everything except its blade. Unlike bronze, which was the dominant metal of the period, this blade possessed an unusual silvery gray appearance. It resisted corrosion. It remained remarkably smooth after thousands of years. For decades, archaeologists admired the weapon primarily as another masterpiece of Egyptian metalworking. Few imagined that its greatest secret lay hidden within the metal itself. To understand why this dagger is so extraordinary, it helps to consider the world into which Tutankhamun was born. Around 1332 BC, iron was astonishingly rare. The Great Iron Age had not yet begun across much of the ancient world. Bronze remained the preferred material for weapons, tools, and ceremonial objects. Producing workable iron required temperatures and techniques that had not yet become widespread. To ancient civilizations, iron was often more valuable than gold. It was unfamiliar, difficult to obtain, almost mysterious. Egyptian texts occasionally referred to iron using a remarkable phrase. They called it the metal of heaven. For centuries, historians debated exactly what that expression meant. Was it simply poetic language? Did priests associate iron with divine origins? Or were ancient Egyptians describing something surprisingly literal? The answer would emerge only after modern science caught up with ancient craftsmanship. For much of the 20th century, scholars suspected the blade might contain meteoritic iron. Small pieces of iron occasionally fall to Earth within meteorites. Unlike iron produced through smelting, meteoric iron forms naturally in space over millions or even billions of years. These celestial rocks contain distinctive mixtures of iron and nickel, unlike most naturally occurring terrestrial iron deposits. The idea was fascinating. But proving it without damaging one of Egypt's greatest treasures posed an enormous challenge. No one wanted to cut samples from Tutankhamun's dagger. Fortunately, technology eventually provided another path. In the early 21st century, researchers used portable X-ray fluorescence analysis, allowing them to examine the blade without removing even the smallest fragment. The results were remarkable. The metal contained unusually high levels of nickel. It also possessed cobalt concentrations consistent with known iron meteorites. Its chemical composition closely matched material that had fallen from space. The ancient Egyptian phrase suddenly acquired startling new meaning. The blade had indeed been forged from metal that originated beyond the Earth. Long before telescopes, long before modern astronomy, long before humanity understood asteroids or planetary formation, Egyptian craftsmen had shaped a fragment of the cosmos into a royal weapon. The discovery raised an obvious question: how? Working meteoric iron is far from simple. Unlike ordinary stone or copper, it behaves differently under repeated heating. Too much heat can weaken its unique crystalline structure. Too little makes shaping difficult. Ancient artisans somehow transformed an exceptionally rare celestial material into a polished blade of extraordinary quality. Microscopic examinations suggest careful hammering rather than primitive casting. Its edges display precision. Its symmetry rivals later iron craftsmanship. This was not an experimental object crudely fashioned from an unusual rock. It was the work of highly skilled metalworkers who clearly understood how to handle an exceptionally challenging material. Where they learned those techniques remains uncertain. Some scholars believe knowledge traveled across international trade networks, linking Egypt with neighboring kingdoms. One important clue comes from diplomatic correspondence known as the Amarna letters. These clay tablets preserve communications between Egyptian pharaohs and foreign rulers during the 18th dynasty. Among them appears a particularly intriguing message. A ruler from the kingdom of Mitanni is believed to have sent Pharaoh Amenhotep III, a predecessor and likely grandfather of Tutankhamun, a collection of royal gifts. Included among them was an iron dagger. The timing is remarkable. Could Tutankhamun's famous weapon actually have been an heirloom passed through the royal family? If so, the dagger may already have possessed generations of history before accompanying the young king into his tomb. Such an inheritance would explain its exceptional craftsmanship. It would also reveal how prized meteoric iron truly was. Objects fashioned from heavenly metal may have circulated only among the highest levels of ancient royalty. Yet, certainty remains elusive. No surviving inscription directly identifies the dagger's origin. No craftsman's signature survives. Like so many ancient treasures, the weapon speaks only through careful scientific investigation. Its silence leaves room for interpretation. The symbolism surrounding the dagger is equally compelling. To ancient Egyptians, the heavens were not empty space. The sky was alive with divine order. Stars represented eternal beings. The sun traveled across the heavens each day before descending into the underworld at night. The cosmos formed an inseparable part of religious thought. If a piece of iron literally fell from the sky, how might it have been understood? Perhaps not simply as metal, perhaps as a gift from the gods, perhaps as physical evidence that the boundary between heaven and earth was not as absolute as it appeared. The phrase "metal of heaven" may therefore reflect both observation and belief. People witnessed brilliant objects streak across the night sky. Some survived impact. Fragments, unlike ordinary stone, could be recovered. These strange materials resisted rust. They contained unfamiliar properties. Without modern geology, their celestial origin would still have been unmistakable. They came from above. That alone carried immense symbolic power. Tutankhamun himself remains one of history's most enigmatic rulers. Ascending the throne as a child, he inherited a kingdom still recovering from the religious revolution associated with Akhenaten. Traditional temples reopened. Older religious practices returned. Political stability gradually re-emerged. Yet Tutankhamun died unexpectedly while still a teenager. His reign lasted only about a decade. Ironically, his relatively modest status during life contrasts sharply with his fame after death. His tomb survived largely intact because later construction projects concealed its entrance beneath layers of debris. Had that not occurred, the meteoritic dagger and thousands of other artifacts might have disappeared forever into the hands of ancient tomb robbers. Instead, the weapon remained sealed beside its owner for more than 30 centuries. One particularly intriguing detail concerns where the dagger was placed. Tutankhamun possessed 2 ceremonial daggers. One featured a traditional gold blade. The other was the meteoritic iron dagger. The celestial blade rested on the right thigh of the mummy, tucked carefully within the linen wrappings. This was no random placement. Egyptian burial customs followed elaborate religious traditions. Objects positioned beside the deceased often served symbolic functions during the journey through the afterlife. Did the heavenly blade possess protective significance? Was it believed capable of defending the king against supernatural dangers? Or did its celestial origin carry deeper spiritual meaning now lost to history? Ancient texts remain frustratingly silent. Yet archaeology encourages such questions because placement rarely occurs without purpose. Scientific examination revealed additional surprises. The blade displays remarkably little corrosion despite its immense age. Meteoric iron often behaves differently from early smelted iron because of its nickel content. Even after thousands of years inside the tomb, the weapon retained an extraordinary finish. Researchers also identified evidence suggesting sophisticated polishing techniques. The craftsmanship rivals work produced many centuries later. Such findings challenge older assumptions about the technological capabilities of late Bronze Age metalworkers. Ancient civilizations often possessed specialized knowledge that modern observers initially underestimate. Again and again, archaeology reminds us that technical skill does not always progress in a simple straight line. Some techniques appear, disappear, and are later rediscovered. The dagger illustrates precisely that complexity. Of course, remarkable discoveries often attract remarkable theories. Because the blade originated beyond Earth, some writers have suggested that it represents evidence of forgotten contact with advanced civilizations, or even visitors from elsewhere in the cosmos. In these interpretations, the celestial metal becomes more than an unusual raw material. It becomes a relic connected to technologies supposedly beyond the abilities of Bronze Age societies. Supporters sometimes point to the precision of the blade, or the apparent sophistication of its manufacture, as indications that ancient people possessed knowledge unavailable through conventional history. Mainstream archaeology offers a different explanation. Meteorites have fallen across Earth for millions of years. Ancient people undoubtedly witnessed some of these dramatic events. Recovering iron from meteorites required no advanced technology beyond recognizing that unusual stones sometimes contained workable metal. Once collected, experienced craftsmen could shape the material through careful hammering and polishing. The rarity of the finished product reflects the rarity of the raw material rather than impossible engineering. Still, even this explanation leaves fascinating questions unanswered. How many meteorites were collected? Who recognized their value? How widely was this knowledge shared? How did metalworkers learn precisely how much heat to apply without damaging the material? Unfortunately, written records provide few details. The mystery shifts from impossible technology to forgotten craftsmanship. Some researchers have expanded the discussion further by examining ancient Egyptian astronomy. The civilization carefully observed celestial cycles. Temple alignments often reflected solar events. Certain pyramids and monuments appear linked to specific stars or cardinal directions. The movement of heavenly bodies influenced calendars, agriculture, and religious ceremonies alike. Against that background, the use of genuine extraterrestrial material acquires additional symbolic resonance. Holding a blade forged from a fallen meteor was not simply possessing rare metal. It was possessing something physically connected to the realm that governed divine order itself. Whether ancient priests viewed it in exactly those terms remains uncertain. Yet, the symbolism is difficult to ignore. The heavens shaped nearly every aspect of Egyptian cosmology. Then, there is another subtle question. How many similar objects have vanished? Unlike gold, iron corrodes under many conditions. If other meteoritic artifacts existed but were buried in less favorable environments, they may have disappeared long ago. Tutankhamun's dagger survived partly because the sealed tomb created unusually stable conditions. Perhaps museums contain additional meteoritic objects whose origins remain unrecognized. Perhaps many have already dissolved into rust, leaving only faint mineral traces behind. The archaeological record often reflects survival rather than original abundance. What remains can distort our understanding of what once existed. Modern researchers continue studying meteoric iron using increasingly sophisticated techniques. Microscopic imaging reveals crystal structures formed over unimaginably long periods inside ancient asteroids. These distinctive patterns cannot be reproduced through ordinary terrestrial smelting. Each meteorite carries within it a chemical history older than our planet's civilizations. Some formed during the earliest stages of the solar system more than 4.5 billion years ago. That realization changes the way one views Tutankhamun's dagger. The gold handle belongs to ancient Egypt, but the blade itself began its journey long before humanity existed, before the pyramids, before the Nile kingdoms, before the first cities, before recorded history. Its atoms condensed within a distant body drifting silently through space. Some catastrophic collision shattered that parent object. One fragment wandered across the solar system for countless ages before finally falling to Earth, where human hands transformed it into a royal treasure. Few archaeological artifacts possess such an extraordinary timeline. The object bridges two histories simultaneously. One is the story of a young pharaoh and his burial beneath the sands of Egypt. The other stretches back to the birth of planets themselves. Perhaps that is why the dagger continues to inspire such fascination. It reminds us that ancient civilizations were not isolated from the wider universe. They watched the same sky we watch today. If the meteoritic dagger of Tutankhamun reminds us that ancient civilizations looked toward the heavens with reverence, another mystery invites an even more provocative question. What happens when the stones themselves seem to look back? Hidden high above the heads of visitors inside one of Egypt's oldest sacred temples is a collection of carvings that, depending on how they are viewed, appear either as an ordinary product of ancient craftsmanship or as images that seem startlingly out of place. For decades, they have been known by an intriguing nickname, the Abydos flying machine hieroglyphs. To some observers, they resemble helicopters, airplanes, submarines, or futuristic aircraft carved into stone more than 3,000 years ago. To others, they are simply the result of damaged inscriptions and overlapping texts, transformed by time into accidental illusions. Somewhere between those two interpretations lies one of archaeology's most fascinating visual mysteries. The story begins in Abydos. Situated on the western side of the Nile, hundreds of kilometers south of modern Cairo, Abydos was among the most sacred cities in ancient Egypt. Long before the Great Pyramids were completed, pilgrims traveled here to honor the god Osiris, ruler of the underworld and guardian of resurrection. For thousands of years, Abydos remained a center of religious devotion, royal ceremonies, and monumental architecture. Even today, the desert landscape carries a remarkable stillness. Golden cliffs rise beyond the fertile edge of the Nile Valley. Fine desert sand gathers around weathered temple walls. Columns cast long shadows beneath the intense Egyptian sun. Every surface seems layered with history. Among the most magnificent structures at Abydos stands the Temple of Seti Wurst. Built during the 19th dynasty, around the 13th century BC, it remains one of the finest surviving temples in Egypt. Unlike many monuments that suffered extensive destruction, large portions of its relief carvings have survived in extraordinary detail. The walls display elegant hieroglyphs, finely carved deities, ceremonial processions, and royal inscriptions celebrating the reign of Pharaoh Seti I and, later, his son Ramesses II. Walking through its halls is like entering a stone archive. Every corridor records names, prayers, victories, rituals, and offerings. Nothing appears accidental. Everything was carved with purpose, which makes one particular set of symbols all the more remarkable. High above an archway inside the temple, visitors eventually notice a group of hieroglyphs unlike any others nearby. From a distance, one shape appears remarkably similar to the outline of a modern helicopter. Nearby, another resembles a sleek aircraft with swept wings. One carving has been compared to a submarine. Another has been likened to a hovering airship or futuristic vehicle. The resemblance is striking enough that countless photographs have circulated around the world. For many people seeing the images for the first time, the reaction is immediate. How could ancient Egyptians possibly have carved machines that would not exist for another 3,000 years? The comparison feels almost impossible to ignore. The so-called helicopter appears complete with what looks like a cockpit, landing skids, and a long tail boom ending in a rotor. The aircraft-like figure seems equally recognizable. Our brains instinctively identify familiar shapes. Within moments, modern technology seems to emerge from ancient stone. Yet, archaeology often teaches a valuable lesson. First impressions are not always the full story. The location of the carvings provides an important clue. Unlike decorative scenes intended for ordinary viewers, these inscriptions occupy an elevated architectural beam known as a lintel. Positioned well above eye level, they formed part of a formal royal inscription rather than an artistic panel depicting daily life or symbolic scenes. Their purpose was textual. They were meant to be read, not admired as pictures. So why do they resemble machines? To answer that question, researchers examined the stone itself more closely. Ancient Egyptian monuments frequently underwent modification after the death of a ruler. A newly crowned king often replaced the name of his predecessor with his own. Rather than carving entirely new monuments, craftsmen sometimes filled older inscriptions with plaster before recutting fresh hieroglyphs across the same surface. This process saved both time and resources. Evidence suggests precisely this happened at Abydos. The original inscription, created during the reign of Seti I, was later altered under Ramesses II. The older hieroglyphs were filled. New ones were carved directly over them. For many years, the plaster remained intact. Eventually, however, centuries of weathering caused portions of the filler material to crumble away. The result was unexpected. fragments of two entirely different inscriptions became visible simultaneously. Instead of reading either original text, observers now see overlapping shapes created by both layers. The effect resembles a visual puzzle. One incomplete hieroglyph merges with another. Lines intersect. Curves combine. Missing sections leave behind outlines that neither inscription originally intended. The famous helicopter appears to emerge naturally from this accidental fusion. To Egyptologists, this explanation is persuasive because similar examples of recarved inscriptions exist elsewhere. Stone monuments across Egypt display evidence of royal names being replaced or modified. Layered inscriptions are a recognized phenomenon. When carefully separated through photography and digital reconstruction, the Abydos carvings begin to resolve into ordinary hieroglyphic texts, honoring two different kings. From a scholarly perspective, the mystery appears largely solved. And yet, the fascination refuses to disappear. Part of the reason lies in human perception itself. Psychologists use the term pareidolia to describe our tendency to recognize familiar images in random or ambiguous patterns. We see faces in clouds, animals in rock formations, figures in shadows. Our minds constantly search for recognizable forms, even when none were intentionally created. The Abydos carvings provide a perfect example. Once someone points out the helicopter, it becomes difficult to see anything else. The shape fixes itself in memory. Every future glance reinforces the impression. Even knowing the archaeological explanation does not entirely erase the visual resemblance. The illusion remains remarkably convincing. Still, not everyone accepts the conventional interpretation. Over the years, the carvings have become central to numerous alternative theories concerning humanity's distant past. Some writers suggest the images preserve genuine knowledge of advanced technology. According to these interpretations, ancient Egypt may have inherited scientific understanding from a forgotten civilization, whose achievements have largely vanished from history. Others propose that visitors possessing advanced machines interacted with early civilizations, leaving subtle traces encoded within monuments and myths. In such interpretations, the helicopter-like figure becomes literal rather than accidental. The temple transforms from a religious monument into a record of extraordinary encounters. Supporters often argue that multiple machine-like shapes appear together, making coincidence seem unlikely. Why, they ask, would overlapping inscriptions accidentally produce several recognizable technological forms instead of only one? Could ancient artists have intentionally incorporated unfamiliar objects into otherwise conventional hieroglyphs? Mainstream researchers remain cautious. It is about how easily history changes through time. A few millimeters of missing plaster, a handful of eroded lines, centuries of weather. Suddenly, an ordinary royal inscription transforms into one of archaeology's most debated images. Stone remembers. But stone also changes. There is another subtle irony hidden within this mystery. Ancient Egyptian writing itself was never purely alphabetical. Hieroglyphs combined sounds, symbols, and visual imagery. Many signs represented birds, tools, animals, plants, or ceremonial objects. Readers understood them simultaneously as pictures and language. Perhaps that is why overlapping inscriptions produce such compelling illusions. The writing system already possesses visual richness. When two messages merge accidentally, entirely new images emerge. Images never intended by either original scribe. The result feels strangely alive, almost as though the monument continues creating meaning long after its builders disappeared. Standing beneath the carved lintel today, visitors often find themselves doing exactly what countless others have done before. They look upward. They narrow their eyes. For a moment, they see what appears to be impossible. Then they look again. The helicopter becomes fragmented. The fragments become hieroglyphs. The hieroglyphs become history. Then, almost unexpectedly, the helicopter returns. It is a reminder that perception and evidence do not always move together. Both deserve attention. Both require patience. Perhaps that is why the Abydos flying machine continues to occupy such a unique place in archaeological mystery. It challenges not only what we think we see, but how we decide what is real. Are these carvings nothing more than an extraordinary coincidence created by overlapping inscriptions and the passage of time? Or do they reveal how easily the human mind discovers patterns that bridge thousands of years between ancient stone and modern imagination? High above the temple floor, where sunlight still brushes the weathered reliefs after more than 3 millennia, the silent carvings offer no answer, leaving each observer to wonder whether the greatest mystery lies within the stone itself or within the eyes that continue to study it. As the enigmatic carvings of Abydos remind us how easily stone can reshape our perception of history, another monument invites a different kind of mystery. This time, there are no hidden symbols or ambiguous inscriptions to interpret. Instead, the mystery lies in something immense, silent and unfinished, a monument that was never meant to remain where it now rests. Frozen forever in the very rock from which it was born, it offers an extraordinarily rare glimpse into the ambitions, techniques, and unanswered questions of ancient Egypt. Far to the south, where the Nile narrows between granite hills and the desert glows beneath an unforgiving sun, lies the ancient city of Aswan. For thousands of years, this region served as Egypt's primary source of granite. The stone here is unlike the softer limestone used for many temples and pyramids. It is dense, crystalline, and extraordinarily durable. Rich with sparkling quartz and dark feldspar, Aswan granite became the preferred material for obelisks, colossal statues, temple columns, and monumental architecture destined to endure for eternity. Even today, the ancient quarries remain remarkably quiet. Weathered boulders rise from the earth like the backs of sleeping giants. Shallow channels cut into the granite reveal the marks of forgotten labor. The silence is broken only by the wind moving across bare stone, carrying with it echoes of thousands of years of human effort. Among these abandoned quarries lies one of Egypt's most astonishing archaeological sites. Unlike nearly every obelisk standing proudly before temples across Egypt, this one never reached its destination. It was never raised toward the sky. It was never carved with royal inscriptions. It never reflected the first rays of dawn above a sacred sanctuary. Instead, it remains exactly where ancient workers left it, partially separated from the bedrock. Immense, motionless, incomplete. It is known simply as the unfinished obelisk. At first sight, its scale is difficult to comprehend. Stretching approximately 42 meters in length and weighing an estimated 1,100 to 1,200 tons, it would have become the largest obelisk ever erected in ancient Egypt had it been completed. To appreciate that size, imagine a modern passenger airplane resting on the ground. The obelisk would be of comparable length. Its weight would exceed that of several fully loaded jumbo jets combined. Even today, moving a single stone block of such mass presents an extraordinary engineering challenge. Yet ancient Egyptian workers intended not merely to transport it. They planned to raise it upright, transport it hundreds of kilometers along the Nile, and install it with remarkable precision before a temple. The sheer ambition inspires immediate wonder. How could such a task have been possible over 3,000 years ago? The quarry itself begins to answer part of that question. Unlike stones cut into separate blocks, an obelisk had to be carved directly from the living bedrock. Workers first outlined its shape upon the granite surface. Then they began cutting deep trenches around 3 sides, gradually isolating the massive shaft while leaving its underside attached. The process demanded extraordinary patience. Every strike mattered. Every crack threatened disaster. Ancient tool marks remain visible throughout the quarry. Hundreds of small depressions cover the surrounding rock. For generations, archaeologists have identified these as evidence of dolerite-pounding stones. Dolerite is an exceptionally hard igneous rock capable of slowly crushing granite through repeated impacts. Rather than slicing the stone with metal chisels, workers used heavy rounded hammerstones to pulverize the surface little by little. It was slow, relentless, almost unimaginable in scale. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that this method does indeed work. Modern researchers using replica dolerite tools have successfully reproduced similar quarry marks. Although labor-intensive, the technique proves surprisingly effective over extended periods. Thousands upon thousands of deliberate blows gradually reshape even the hardest granite. The evidence strongly supports the conclusion that ancient Egyptian craftsmen possessed both the knowledge and endurance necessary for such monumental work. Yet, standing beside the unfinished obelisk, another question naturally arises. If they knew how to create it, why was it abandoned? The answer appears etched across its surface. Running through the granite is a long natural fracture. Some sections reveal smaller cracks branching away from the main fault. At some point during excavation, workers realized the stone had become structurally compromised. Had they continued, the finished monument might have broken during transport or while being raised into position. After months, perhaps years, of labor, the project suddenly became impossible. The decision must have been devastating. Rather than risk catastrophe, the workers simply stopped. Their tools fell silent. The obelisk remained attached to the earth forever. For archaeologists, this abandonment became an extraordinary gift. Because the monument was never completed, it preserves an ancient construction site almost exactly as workers left it. Elsewhere, finished obelisks conceal the techniques used to produce them. Here, every stage remains visible. The channels, the unfinished surfaces, the tool marks, the careful planning. The quarry functions almost like a frozen workshop from another age. Many scholars believe the obelisk was commissioned during the reign of Queen Hatshepsut in the 15th century BC. Hatshepsut remains one of Egypt's most remarkable rulers. Although female pharaohs were rare, she governed with considerable authority and oversaw ambitious building projects throughout Egypt. Several completed obelisks associated with her reign still survive, demonstrating her enthusiasm for monumental architecture. If the Aswan obelisk truly belonged to her construction program, it would have represented the most ambitious example ever attempted. Yet, certainty remains elusive. No inscription directly identifies its intended destination. No surviving records describe its abandonment. Like so many ancient mysteries, archaeology reconstructs events from physical evidence rather than complete written accounts. The crack explains why work stopped. It does not reveal every detail surrounding the project. And that leaves room for further questions. Even if the obelisk had remained intact, how would ancient Egyptians have moved it? This question has fascinated engineers for generations. Transporting smaller obelisks is already difficult enough. Several surviving examples weigh between 300 and 500 tons. The unfinished obelisk would have weighed more than twice as much. One widely accepted theory suggests workers would have completely separated the monument from the bedrock before placing it onto an enormous wooden sledge. Teams of laborers, perhaps assisted by lubricated pathways and carefully prepared surfaces, could then have dragged the sledge toward the Nile. Ancient tomb paintings depict workers pouring water before heavy sledges, reducing friction between wood and sand. Modern experiments confirm that damp sand significantly decreases the force required to move massive loads. From the riverbank, specially designed barges may have transported the obelisk downstream during periods of high water. Upon reaching its destination, equally sophisticated techniques involving ramps, earthen embankments, ropes, and counterweights may have raised it into its final position. No single surviving document explains the entire procedure. Instead, researchers piece together clues from archaeology, engineering studies, surviving artwork, and practical experimentation. The result forms a convincing reconstruction. Yet, certain details remain uncertain, especially at the extraordinary scale represented by the unfinished obelisk. Some engineers have questioned whether traditional methods alone could realistically move an object exceeding 1,000 tons. The required manpower would have been enormous. The risk equally immense. A single structural failure could destroy years of labor. Others argue that ancient Egyptian logistics have repeatedly been underestimated. Again and again, archaeological discoveries reveal organizational abilities exceeding earlier assumptions. Large workforces, careful planning, seasonal coordination, sophisticated understanding of materials. None of these require lost technologies. They require disciplined administration and remarkable experience. Still, the unanswered details continue inviting speculation. Naturally, alternative theories have flourished. Some independent researchers argue that the precision of Egyptian stoneworking exceeds what pounding stones alone could achieve. They point to remarkably flat surfaces, smooth cuts, and immense stone blocks found elsewhere in Egypt. Could ancient craftsmen have possessed forgotten tools now lost to history? Some propose advanced mechanical devices. Others imagine techniques involving vibration, concentrated heat, or forms of energy unknown to conventional archaeology. The unfinished obelisk frequently appears in discussions suggesting that ancient civilizations inherited technological knowledge far beyond what surviving evidence indicates. Supporters often ask a simple question: if modern engineers struggle with objects of similar size, how did ancient people intend to accomplish the task? Mainstream archaeology responds that difficulty should not be confused with impossibility. Ancient societies commanded resources that modern observers sometimes overlook. Thousands of skilled laborers working over many years could achieve results impossible for small teams operating under contemporary economic constraints. Experimental projects continue demonstrating that surprisingly simple tools can accomplish extraordinary work when combined with patience and organization. Even so, certain practical details remain subjects of active investigation. Exactly how workers intended to lift an 1,100-ton obelisk into vertical position remains one of the most challenging engineering puzzles in Egyptology. The quarry itself offers additional clues that deepen the mystery. Around the unfinished monument lie numerous smaller extraction sites, channels, and abandoned stone blocks. Some show evidence of successful quarrying. Others reveal cracks similar to those that doomed the great obelisk. Together, they illustrate an important reality. Ancient builders did not always succeed. Modern visitors often imagine Egypt's monuments as products of effortless perfection. The quarry tells a different story. Failures occurred. Materials broke. Plans changed. Workers adapted. The unfinished obelisk therefore humanizes one of history's greatest civilizations. Behind every completed monument stood countless invisible decisions, setbacks, and risks. There is something profoundly moving about that realization. The abandoned stone captures not triumph, but perseverance. Some researchers have noticed another intriguing feature. Because the monument remains attached to the bedrock along its underside, it preserves evidence of excavation techniques rarely visible elsewhere. Workers appear to have left narrow supporting ridges beneath portions of the shaft, while removing surrounding granite. These temporary supports may have prevented unwanted stress during carving. Only after completing the upper surfaces would the final separation have occurred. If correct, this reveals a sophisticated understanding of structural stability. Such details emerge only because the work stopped before completion. Failure, paradoxically, preserved knowledge that success would have erased. There is also a philosophical dimension to the site. Obelisks themselves carried profound symbolic meaning. Their tall tapering forms represented rays of sunlight frozen in stone. They honored the solar god and expressed connections between heaven and earth. Placed before temples, they transformed architecture into cosmic symbolism. The unfinished obelisk never fulfilled that sacred role. Instead of standing upright beneath the open sky, it rests horizontally within the earth from which it emerged. It exists between two states, neither natural rock nor completed monument, neither quarry stone nor sacred symbol. It occupies a rare threshold where intention remains forever incomplete. Perhaps that contributes to its unusual emotional power. Visitors are not looking at what ancient Egypt accomplished. They are looking at what ancient Egypt almost accomplished. That distinction matters. History often celebrates finished achievements while overlooking abandoned dreams. Yet, incomplete projects sometimes reveal more about human ambition than completed ones. Every tool mark records confidence. Every trench reflects planning. Every meter of carved granite represents belief that the impossible could become reality. Then the crack appeared. Everything changed. Modern technology has continued examining the monument in remarkable detail. Laser scanning maps microscopic surface variations. Geological studies analyze the natural fracture responsible for its abandonment. Three-dimensional digital models allow engineers to estimate stresses that would have developed during transport. Each investigation improves our understanding. Yet none can fully recreate the conversations held by the ancient workers themselves. Who first noticed the crack? Did they debate continuing? Did supervisors hope the damage might prove insignificant? Or did everyone immediately recognize that months of labor had come to nothing? Those voices have vanished, only the stone remains. Perhaps that silence explains why the unfinished obelisk continues to fascinate both scholars and visitors alike. Unlike completed monuments, it invites imagination into the spaces left unfinished. One can almost picture the quarry alive with activity. The rhythmic impact of dolerite stones, the shouted instructions, the dust rising beneath the desert sun. Then, one day, the rhythm stops. The workers depart. The granite waits. Centuries become millennia. Wind replaces voices. Sand replaces footsteps. And the monument that was meant to stand among the greatest achievements of ancient Egypt instead becomes one of its most revealing mysteries. Experimental projects continue demonstrating that surprisingly simple tools can accomplish extraordinary work when combined with patience and organization. Even so, certain practical details remain subjects of active investigation. Exactly how workers intended to lift an 1,100-ton obelisk into vertical position remains one of the most challenging engineering puzzles in Egyptology. The quarry itself offers additional clues that deepen the mystery. Around the unfinished monument lie numerous smaller extraction sites, channels, and abandoned stone blocks. Some show evidence of successful quarrying. Others reveal cracks similar to those that doomed the great obelisk. Together, they illustrate an important reality. Ancient builders did not always succeed. Modern visitors often imagine Egypt's monuments as products of effortless perfection. The quarry tells a different story. Failures occurred. Materials broke. Plans changed. Workers adapted. The unfinished obelisk therefore humanizes one of history's greatest civilizations. Behind every completed monument stood countless invisible decisions, setbacks, and risks. There is something profoundly moving about that realization. The abandoned stone captures not triumph, but perseverance. Some researchers have noticed another intriguing feature. Because the monument remains attached to the bedrock along its underside, it preserves evidence of excavation techniques rarely visible elsewhere. Workers appear to have left narrow supporting ridges beneath portions of the shaft, while removing surrounding granite. These temporary supports may have prevented unwanted stress during carving. Only after completing the upper surfaces would the final separation have occurred. If correct, this reveals a sophisticated understanding of structural stability. Such details emerge only because the work stopped before completion. Failure, paradoxically, preserved knowledge that success would have erased. There is also a philosophical dimension to the site. Obelisks themselves carried profound symbolic meaning. Their tall tapering forms represented rays of sunlight frozen in stone. They honored the solar god and expressed connections between heaven and earth. Placed before temples, they transformed architecture into cosmic symbolism. The unfinished obelisk never fulfilled that sacred role. Instead of standing upright beneath the open sky, it rests horizontally within the earth from which it emerged. It exists between two states, neither natural rock nor completed monument, neither quarry stone nor sacred symbol. It occupies a rare threshold where intention remains forever incomplete. Perhaps that contributes to its unusual emotional power. Visitors are not looking at what ancient Egypt accomplished. They are looking at what ancient Egypt almost accomplished. That distinction matters. History often celebrates finished achievements while overlooking abandoned dreams. Yet, incomplete projects sometimes reveal more about human ambition than completed ones. Every tool mark records confidence. Every trench reflects planning. Every meter of carved granite represents belief that the impossible could become reality. Then the crack appeared. Everything changed. Modern technology has continued examining the monument in remarkable detail. Laser scanning maps microscopic surface variations. Geological studies analyze the natural fracture responsible for its abandonment. Three-dimensional digital models allow engineers to estimate stresses that would have developed during transport. Each investigation improves our understanding. Yet none can fully recreate the conversations held by the ancient workers themselves. Who first noticed the crack? Did they debate continuing? Did supervisors hope the damage might prove insignificant? Or did everyone immediately recognize that months of labor had come to nothing? Those voices have vanished, only the stone remains. Perhaps that silence explains why the unfinished obelisk continues to fascinate both scholars and visitors alike. Unlike completed monuments, it invites imagination into the spaces left unfinished. One can almost picture the quarry alive with activity. The rhythmic impact of dolerite stones, the shouted instructions, the dust rising beneath the desert sun. Then, one day, the rhythm stops. The workers depart. The granite waits. Centuries become millennia. Wind replaces voices. Sand replaces footsteps. And the monument that was meant to stand among the greatest achievements of ancient Egypt instead becomes one of its most revealing mysteries. Alternative writers occasionally describe it as an energy structure, a ceremonial instrument, or a monument designed to interact with natural forces unknown to modern science. These ideas often point to the pyramid's unusual proportions, internal chambers, and exceptional preservation. Mainstream archaeology, however, finds no direct evidence supporting such claims. The monument's construction techniques, materials, and archaeological context fit comfortably within the broader development of Old Kingdom pyramid architecture. Still, the absence of definitive explanations for every design decision allows such theories to persist. The bent pyramid occupies that fascinating space where established knowledge and unanswered questions coexist. Another intriguing aspect concerns its remarkably well-preserved casing stones. Most Egyptian pyramids lost their polished limestone coverings over centuries, as later civilizations quarried them for new construction. The bent pyramid retains much of its original outer surface. This provides researchers with invaluable information about ancient finishing techniques. The casing stones fit together with astonishing precision. Their smooth surfaces once reflected sunlight brilliantly, transforming the monument into an immense luminous beacon visible across the surrounding landscape. Imagine standing in the Nile Valley more than 4,000 years ago. Morning sunlight strikes the polished limestone. The pyramid glows. Its brilliant white surfaces contrast sharply against the golden desert. The effect must have been extraordinary. Far more than a tomb, it became a statement of divine kingship, rising above the horizon. Some scholars believe the preserved casing also helps explain why the change in angle appears so visually striking today. Had the outer stones disappeared, the bend might have looked less pronounced. Instead, the original geometry remains beautifully visible. The monument continues displaying the very decision its builders made thousands of years ago. There is another subtle mystery woven into Sneferu's remarkable building program. He appears to have commissioned at least 3 major pyramids during his reign. The Meidum Pyramid, often regarded as an earlier project, suffered partial collapse. The bent pyramid introduced its unusual change in angle. The red pyramid finally achieved the classic form later perfected at Giza. Viewed together, these monuments resemble chapters within a single engineering story. Each project teaches lessons reflected in the next. Each monument represents accumulated experience. Some historians have compared this sequence to the development of early aviation or modern space exploration. Technological breakthroughs rarely emerge fully formed. They evolve through repeated attempts, careful observation, unexpected setbacks, and gradual refinement. Seen this way, the bent pyramid becomes far more than an architectural curiosity. It becomes physical evidence of innovation itself. It reminds us that ancient civilizations advanced through experimentation every bit as much as modern ones. Not every mystery surrounding the pyramid concerns its exterior. Its internal design remains unusually complex. The corbelled chambers rise high above visitors' heads, distributing immense weight outward through carefully arranged stone courses. This technique demonstrates remarkable understanding of structural forces. Yet, certain architectural choices remain difficult to explain. Some passageways appear modified. Connections between chambers suggest evolving plans during construction. Were these changes related to the altered exterior slope? Or did they reflect shifting ceremonial requirements? Again, archaeology offers possibilities rather than certainty. Perhaps most intriguing of all is how the bent pyramid challenges our expectations of ancient perfection. Popular imagination often portrays Egyptian builders as possessing absolute confidence. Every stone placed precisely, every measurement predetermined, every monument flawless. The bent pyramid tells a richer story. It suggests architects capable of recognizing problems, workers willing to alter established plans, administrators prepared to invest enormous additional effort rather than abandon an ambitious project. Far from diminishing their accomplishments, this adaptability makes them even more impressive. Engineering is rarely the art of never making adjustments. It is the art of making the right adjustments before disaster occurs. The pyramid's survival across 45 centuries may represent the ultimate validation of that wisdom. Yet, one question continues quietly lingering. What if the bend was neither accident nor correction? What if it reflected a deliberate decision whose original purpose has simply been forgotten? History contains countless examples of symbolic meanings disappearing while physical structures remain. Languages vanish. Religions evolve. Cultural knowledge fades. As the bent pyramid leaves us contemplating whether ancient builders altered their designs for practical reasons or according to meanings now lost to history, another mystery reminds us that stone can preserve more than architecture. Sometimes it preserves stories carved centuries after the events they describe, blurring the boundary between history, memory, and legend. In southern Egypt, on a quiet island where granite cliffs rise above the Nile, one such inscription continues to challenge historians with a tale of famine, divine intervention, and forgotten knowledge. The story begins on the island of Sehel, just south of Aswan, where the Nile winds between smooth granite outcrops. Hundreds of ancient inscriptions cover the weathered rocks. Travelers, officials, priests, merchants, and royal expeditions left their names here across thousands of years. The island itself feels timeless. Wind moves gently through scattered acacia trees. The river flows past polished stone that has watched countless civilizations rise and fade. Under the bright Egyptian sun, the granite glitters softly, preserving voices from a distant past. Among these many inscriptions is one that has fascinated scholars for generations. Unlike simple records of journeys or official decrees, this text tells a dramatic story. It speaks of 7 years without harvest, 7 years of empty granaries, 7 years of drought, and a desperate pharaoh seeking answers from the gods. Today, this remarkable inscription is known as the Famine Stela. Carved into a granite boulder on Sehel Island, the inscription stretches across dozens of carefully engraved lines. At first glance, it resembles many other Egyptian texts. Hieroglyphs cover the surface with orderly precision, framed by traditional royal imagery. Time has softened some of the details, but the inscription remains surprisingly well preserved. According to the text, the events take place during the reign of Pharaoh Djoser, one of Egypt's earliest great rulers, and the king traditionally associated with the step pyramid at Saqqara. The narrative begins with uncertainty. The Nile has failed. Its annual flood, the lifeblood of Egyptian civilization, has not risen to its expected height. Fields lie barren. Food grows scarce. Communities struggle to survive. For 7 long years, the kingdom suffers beneath an unforgiving sky. The description is vivid despite its brevity. The royal treasury begins to empty. Temples receive fewer offerings. Officials can no longer fulfill their duties. Ordinary people endure increasing hardship. Ancient Egypt depended completely upon the rhythm of the Nile. Without the annual flood, agriculture collapsed. Without agriculture, the entire kingdom faced crisis. Even today, the image remains haunting. An empire built beside one of the world's greatest rivers brought to the edge of disaster by the absence of water. The pharaoh, troubled by the suffering of his people, turns to his advisors. He seeks the wisdom of priests and scholars. He asks a question both practical and deeply spiritual. Why has the Nile abandoned Egypt? The answer, according to the inscription, lies not in politics or engineering, but in divine favor. The high priest explains that the source of the Nile's blessing belongs to the god Khnum. Khnum occupied a special place within Egyptian religion. Often depicted with the head of a ram, he was believed to fashion human beings upon a potter's wheel, shaping both body and spirit before birth. He also served as guardian of the Nile's source, controlling the life-giving waters upon which Egypt depended. His principal sanctuary stood at Elephantine, near Aswan, not far from Sehel Island itself. The king undertakes a sacred journey. He visits the temple. He offers prayers. Then, during the night, Djoser experiences a dream. Within that dream, Khnum appears before him. The god promises to restore the Nile. The waters will rise once more. The famine will end. Prosperity will return to the land. Generation after generation repeated familiar narratives. Details shifted. Emphasis changed. Historical events blended gradually with theological interpretation. By the time the inscription reached stone, it may already have accumulated centuries of retelling. Distinguishing original memory from later interpretation becomes nearly impossible. That uncertainty has encouraged more speculative theories. Some independent researchers argue that the famine stela preserves fragments of forgotten events reaching back to the earliest dynasties. According to these interpretations, the text may contain echoes of environmental disasters largely absent from surviving historical records. Others suggest the inscription hints at advanced administrative knowledge concerning flood prediction and water management inherited from even older civilizations. A few writers extend these ideas further still. They propose that the account preserves evidence of catastrophic climate change affecting prehistoric Egypt, remembered imperfectly through sacred tradition. Within these theories, the 7-year famine becomes more than symbolic storytelling. It becomes a cultural memory stretching across vast spans of time. Mainstream scholarship approaches such ideas cautiously. While acknowledging that ancient traditions sometimes preserve authentic memories of real events, historians emphasize the importance of archaeological evidence. At present, no definitive findings confirm that the famine stela records an actual 7-year drought during Djoser's reign. Its composition centuries later complicates direct historical interpretation. Even so, the possibility that older traditions contributed to the text remains entirely plausible. History and legend need not exist as complete opposites. Often, they overlap in complex and fascinating ways. The connection between Djoser and his famous architect Imhotep adds another dimension to the mystery. Although Imhotep receives only indirect attention within the broader historical context, his reputation grew enormously after his lifetime. Originally remembered as a brilliant architect and royal official, later generations came to regard him as a sage, healer, and eventually even a divine figure. Some readers have wondered whether traditions associated with Djoser's reign, including stories preserved in the famine stela, reflect the extraordinary prestige later attached to both king and architect. Could the narrative represent part of a broader effort to portray Djoser's era as a golden age of wisdom and divine favor? Again, certainty remains elusive. The inscription reveals as much about the society that carved it as the distant past it describes. Standing before the granite surface today, one becomes aware of another remarkable aspect. Unlike papyrus scrolls, stone was chosen deliberately. Papyrus decays. Stone endures. Those responsible for carving the famine stela intended its message to survive across generations. Its permanence mattered. Every hieroglyph required careful labor. Every line reflected conscious investment. The story deserved preservation. That decision alone suggests its importance to those who commissioned it. Modern technology has continued revealing subtle details hidden within the inscription. High-resolution photography enhances weathered hieroglyphs. Digital modeling reconstructs damaged passages. Comparisons with other temple inscriptions clarify linguistic features characteristic of the Ptolemaic period. Each advance improves translation, while simultaneously highlighting the remarkable literary quality of the text. The narrative unfolds with dramatic pacing. The king questions. The priests respond. The god appears. The crisis resolves. It possesses the structure of carefully crafted storytelling. Whether history, theology, political document, or some combination of all three, It was clearly intended to persuade as well as inform. There is also something timeless about its central concern. Across civilizations and throughout history, prolonged drought has inspired both practical solutions and spiritual reflection. Communities facing environmental crisis naturally ask profound questions. Why has this happened? Can it be reversed? Who or what controls forces beyond human influence? The famine stela records one ancient society's answer. Its response belongs simultaneously to religion, governance, and survival. Perhaps that explains why the inscription continues speaking so powerfully today. Its mystery extends beyond archaeology. It touches universal human experience, the uncertainty of nature, the search for meaning during hardship, the hope that wisdom, whether divine or human, can restore balance.